Please be advised that this recorded webinar has been edited from its original format, which may have included a product demo. To set up a live demo or to request more information, please complete the form to the right. Or if you are currently not on CSE Global, there is a link to the website in the description of this video. Thank you.
Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Why Domain Names Are Central to Your Cybersecurity. My name is Tariq Hopkins, and I will be your moderator. Joining us today is Stephanie Mitchell, Eva Zane, and Ula Lissabas. Stephanie is a marketing manager for CSE's Digital Brand Services unit based in the UK. Eva is a product manager for domains based in the US, and Ula is a digital brand consultant in the Nordics. And without further ado, I'll go ahead and pass it over to Stephanie.
Thanks, Tariq, and thanks to everyone who's joined us today. Welcome. In today's session, I'll start off with a quick overview of what's been going on with domains and DNS out there, just to set the scene. And then I will be asking some questions of Eva and Ulla about domains and cybersecurity, how they link, best practices for keeping your brands and domains secure, and about domain management. And then I'll pass back over to Tariq, who'll take you through our upcoming events and webinars and so forth, anything that we're hosting that's coming up. So to kick off, I'm going to do a quick run through of what's been happening in terms of domains and how having the right level of security with domains can be an important part of your company's cybersecurity posture. So if you can even remember a time before COVID-19, difficult, I know, but back in 2019, there were a series of cyber attacks that occurred that were dubbed the sea turtle attacks, and these targeted public and private entities, including national security organizations. And just prior to that, the Department of Homeland Security in the USA, they issued an emergency directive mandating all government websites take certain series of actions to make sure that their domains and DNS were secure. Then we saw ICANN issue an alert that was advocating many of the same recommendations as the DHS. So by the end of 2019, we were already seeing some serious activity from bad actors. Then, as we all remember, COVID-19 hit, which opened up a whole new world of opportunity for the hijackers, the counterfeiters, and fraudsters out there. So whilst we've all become more reliant on the online world for everything, from work, grocery shopping, online banking, virtual doctor's appointments, all of these things have meant that bad actors have seized the opportunities that has been afforded by the shift. So in terms of phishing, by November 2020, Google had registered over 2 million phishing websites, and this was around 20% more than the whole of 2019. So we can clearly see here that the pandemic is having an effect on the way that the fraudsters are working. And we also have heard of data breaches of some of the huge worldwide brands. But perhaps more worryingly, there were breaches reported for large retail registrars. One in particular got hacked via a social engineering tactic, and it basically tricked the employees into transferring ownership and control over the targeted domains to fraudsters, which is a big worry. And then in terms of domain and DNS hijacking, in 2021, DNS hijacking is an attack vector that both cyber criminals and nation states are pursuing. So last year, Krebs on Security reported a GoDaddy employee was phished, which led to an attacker changing the DNS entries for escrow.com. And then again, in November of 2020, fraudsters redirected email and web traffic directed for several cryptocurrency trading platforms. So, you know, these fraudsters are really moving. They're really moving with the changes that are going on with COVID-19. So, yeah, there's a lot going on. But the question is, where has that left us? Well, it's left us in a position where cybersecurity has become more important than ever. When it comes to phishing, data breaches, hijacks, it's more often than not a domain that is the part in the chain that is compromised, the weak link, and that is why we're here today. So, yeah, I'm delighted to be joined today by Eva Zane and Ulla Lissabas, and they'll be able to tell us much more on why domain names are so vital in keeping your online presence secure. So, Eva, Ulla, welcome. And without further ado, I'm going to kick off with the first question. And let's kick off with a big one. It's the question of the day. Why are domains central to cybersecurity?
Thank you, Stephanie. It's a good question, and really it's a big one. Domains are at the foundation of any brand's online presence. They power websites, apps, email, voice over IP, as well as APIs that we use for internal processes and procedures. If a domain goes down for any reason, you can lose one or all of these things, leaving your company in real trouble. If your website or app goes down, you're losing revenue. If your email or voice over IP is lost, you've lost your means of communication. And if your internal APIs crash, then the whole process is shut down, losing you both time and money. Not only that, but domains can be the key that opens the door to DNS. So when they are compromised, criminals can redirect websites for financial gain. They can intercept emails to conduct espionage, harvest credentials to breach your network. Obviously, this has significant impact on your company's revenue and reputation and exposes you to considerable fines as a result of GDPR. At CST, we often say that domains are like the king in a game of chess. Once the king falls, the game is over. And we've definitely seen plenty of examples of this where this happened over the couple past years.
Okay, so I'm just wondering, can either of you share an example with us?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's one very recent example that has come to light, which is the Pearl.com domain hijack. So this domain was stolen already back in September 2020 while with a registrar called Network Solutions. It was then transferred to another registrar in China on Christmas Day, and then finally it moved to the Key Systems Registrar on January 27, 2021, all happening without the knowledge of the owners. So shortly after the Pearl.com domain was hijacked, the domain was first put up for sale on a retail registrar site for, I think it was $190,000 US, although this listing was pulled very quickly afterwards. But today, the Pearl.com domain uses an IP address tied to malware, which is a clear risk for customers using that site. And the owners of Pearl.com have lost, if not the most vital domain name that their company has. And they have now had to create a temporary domain, I think it's pearl.com.pearl.org, to host its main website. So there are many consequences as a result of this hijack, such as loss of traffic and users potentially contracting malware when visiting the site. And the fact is that this domain was taken from under their noses without them even realizing. Now, this particular hijacking just took down their main website, but it could have been a domain that also hosted their emails, their infrastructure. It could also have been used for phishing, resulting in a number of threats like data breaches, money transfers, and so on.
That's really quite incredible, and it shows how vulnerable the whole of a company's online ecosystem can be just through that one domain. But you know, we know that people out there that deal with IT and security are spending on their security systems, but they're still open to these kind of attacks. So what's going on there?
So the issue here is that yes, security staff are spending money on securing their internal systems, but usually only within the firewall. Attacks like domain name DNS and subdomain hijacking all happen outside of this, and therefore making sure that you have the right security measures in place is absolutely vital in preventing these type of attacks from taking place. And CEC's own research from our domain security report shows that there are big gaps in the adoption of security measures to prevent such attacks from happening. Our last report showed that 83% of the top global 2,000 companies were at greater risk of domain hijacking just because they hadn't adopted the basic sort of domain security measures such as Registry Lock. When it comes to domains, essentially at a high level there are two risks when it comes to hijacking attacks, namely poor management of your digital assets, leading then to third-party attacks.
Okay, so one basically leads on to the other one. So you have poor management, and then you're at risk from third-party attacks. Can you go into a little bit more detail about that?
So sure. Eva, you're the product manager for domains. Do you want to take this one?
Sure, thanks. Of course. So imagine you have a portfolio of domains. Some are active, some are defensive, some are blocked. Some maybe power your external websites, are used for your internal processes. And let's say you're a global company, maybe you're operating in multiple countries. The question is, do you know who has a log of all those domain names that you own, and what do those domains do? Who registered them? Where did they register them? There's really so many things that can become what we call security blind spots. If you don't know what you have, where you have it, and how it's used, you're really leaving yourself vulnerable to attack. On top of this, depending on who is in charge of a particular domain, may mean that it has or it may have not the vital security measures in place to protect it. And that's a really big red light. It really leaves you open to attacks. That means that your DNS may be at risk, your websites could be redirected at any point during the lookup process to a malicious site, and as a result, you could be phished or you can suffer a data breach.
Okay, so some clear risks there, but can you perhaps help us to understand the different types of attacks that the domain names are subject to?
Sure. So domain hijacking is basically someone getting unauthorized control of your domain, either through gaining ownership or gaining control of the DNS. Again, as mentioned before, Multilock can help you to protect you against the DNS being changed or the domain being transferred without your knowledge. But then yet another risk is to your DNS is something like cache poisoning, which is where attackers can redirect your traffic to a malicious website through targeting the recursive DNS. This is an attack at the ISP level, so again, well outside the company's firewall. DNSSEC is a way to prevent these kinds of attacks at the ISP level. And then there are many other different subsets of DNS hijacking, like DNS shadowing, subdomain hijacking, and so forth. These are more focused on the DNS and the web hosting providers, which is why, again, it's so important to choose the right partners from the start for these type of things.
Okay, so all of these threats are sitting outside of the firewall, and they're the potential sort of weak links in your security posture. But I think you mentioned a couple of solutions, but you know, are there more solutions? What can people do to sort of mitigate these risks?
Well, let's look back at what Ulla said about finding the right partners, and really starting with the absolute basics here and finding the right registrar. If your registrar doesn't have a strong security posture, then it's leaving your vital assets open to attacks. Enterprise-level registrars are the best choice, as opposed to retail registrars. And there are really two key components to being an enterprise-class provider. The first is more from a technology standpoint. It means having enterprise-class data centers, being ISO compliant, performing continuous vulnerability checks and penetration testing, having 24/7 monitoring responses. So really making sure that our own networks as a registrar are protected and secure. Of course, being ICANN and registry accredited with all the TLDs around the world is a must. And enterprise registrars provide technology solutions in addition to that, like single sign-on, IP validation, two-factor authentication, user permissions configurations that allow you to really have clear control over access rights to the system. Enterprise registrars can also offer 100% uptime on their DNS, which really is essential for the continuation of your online presence. So that's number one. The second component is having the right operational processes in place to make sure that your customer domains, DNS, digital certificates, that all of these assets are well protected. And enterprise-level providers can do that. They have things like security first policy in place, phishing awareness trainings, social engineering trainings for the staff, mandated clear desk policies. They only work with written requests from the customers. Their data is GDPR compliant and so forth. So put simply, retail registrars don't always have these mandated policies in place, and it's leaving your brand at risk. Many attackers make use of social engineering techniques. They target customer service teams to gain access to accounts, and that gives them then later down control over domains and zone files. Without the necessary training, employees just don't stand a chance. And they may fall victim, putting your vital domains at risk.
I see. So having the correct registrar is a pretty fundamental piece of the puzzle there. Essentially, if domains are the foundation of your online security, then the foundation of safe domains in a way is choosing the right registrar.
Precisely. So making sure you're with a secure provider is a top priority, but it's not the only one. There are a number of key security protocols that should be put into place to secure your vital domains. And here we're looking at things like Registry Lock, DNSSEC, CA records, and DMARC. Let me just take those in order. So for the first one, what Registry Lock does is it disables automation between a registrar and a registry so that the DNS can't be changed unless there's a manual password which is verified by a phone process to unlock that domain name and then allowing it the requested change to be made. This is a highly secure, highly effective way to make sure that an important domain name's DNS can't be changed without the proper controls in place.
And I think it's worth saying here also that being able to really identify those critical domains is really half of the battle here. If you don't know what your vital domains are, how are you going to know which ones to secure? We have some ways that can help you here. Our CSC Security Center can help assess which of the domains are conducting business critical work. And once that's identified, then you really know which ones you have to protect with the additional protocols.
Exactly, and that's a great point, Eva, and worth mentioning that Security Center can also help you sort of identify these other solutions that we're talking about as well. So with that, next I'll cover DNSSEC, which is a protocol that essentially enables authentication communication between the DNS servers. So any attacks at the DNS layer, such as cache poisoning, will be prevented by the use of DNSSEC, and this is really key because once someone can affect your DNS, then you're really in trouble. With that in mind, it's really of some concern that it's only about 3% of the top 2,000 global companies that deploy DNSSEC today, and this is a very sort of cost-effective measure that effectively does stop hackers from taking control of an internet browsing session and then redirecting users to deceptive websites. So next up is one protocol that we haven't spoken of yet, but it is very important, and I'll explain why in just a second. So the protocol we want to discuss is called CA records, and this stands for Certificate Authority Authorization Records. CA records basically say which certificate providers you can authorize to issue certificates for your domains. And the reason this is important is because in a lot of attacks, once an attacker gets access to a domain name, they will often get access to or try to have a new digital certificate issued, which then potentially allows them to decrypt encrypted information like VPN passwords, and potentially encrypted emails and so forth. But with CA records in place, if the attacker doesn't go to the particular certificate authority that you have authorized, two things will happen. So firstly, the request will fail. But also, secondly, an alert will be sent to you to let you know that someone tried to request a new certificate that was out of your CAA policy. So this is a great compliance tool, but it's also a great security layer to see if someone is trying to issue a certificate on one of your key domain names. Now the final protocol to recommend is called DMARC. So DMARC is an email authentication protocol that's very effective in preventing email spoofing. And for those of you that are familiar with how email works, you'll know that it's very easy to spoof an email and make it look like it's being sent from someone when it really isn't. DMARC basically eliminates that, so it's very important for your key domain names to consider applying DMARC in combination with other email security records like DKIM and SPF to eliminate that risk of domain spoofing by email. We mentioned earlier about attackers targeting employees of companies, but with DMARC in place, you'll be able to prevent spoofing attempts by stopping the email even getting to the recipient in the first place. So basically cutting out some of that risk of human error.
Okay, great. That was a great roundup of all those protocols. So really helpful. So we're choosing the right provider. Then adding these key security protocols to protect the domain names. But it strikes me that there is another key question here, and that is, how do you know which domains are the ones that you need to add these protocols to? Do you add to all of them? Do you add to specific ones? How do you figure that out?
That's a great question. And we mentioned the CSE Security Center, but I think before we even go there, we should take a little bit of a step back and look at really how to know which domain names you should even own, and then we can see how we decide what protocols for security to add on. Creating a domain name policy can really help you ensure that you have the right domain names in your portfolio, and it can help you ensure that the right access to the portals where those domains sit is kept, and that the domain names themselves are properly secured as a result. So outlining guidelines for the organization on how domains need to be handled really can be a great start. It doesn't really have to be complicated, and some domain policies fit on one page, but it can really help target some of those main challenges that organizations face when managing a domain portfolio, and can help strengthen, as a result, your cybersecurity posture.
Right. So you mentioned challenges. Can you give an example? What might those challenges be?
Yeah, I think two main challenges are really having a good accounting of the digital assets and defining the right portfolio for the organization. So let's start with the first one, and just having good accounting or visibility. One big issue we often see is not having a good accounting of all the domains that a company owns. Many companies have a hard time accounting for all the digital assets. Domains may be split in multiple vendor accounts. Registrations are done by team members who just use multiple domain registrars. And it's really easy to lose track of where the domains sit. And that can mean time wasted when an urgent issue comes up or when an incident occurs. It also creates difficulty in assessing the good guys from the bad guys. We see that a lot in our brand protection programs. It's sometimes very hard to tell if the domain name belongs to a fraudster or if it was registered by maybe a misguided employee outside the standard registrar. In their 2019 Domain Fraud Report, Proofpoint found that 76% of their customers found lookalike domains posing as their brand. So imagine really having a list of domains that you own is critical here to help you understand what's yours and what isn't.
That's a great point, Eva, and I would like to add to that often names registered with retail grade registrars will have renewals dependent on a credit card being kept on file. And as we mentioned before, retail grade registrars have a very limited security measures available to protect things like access to systems. So consolidating your domains with an enterprise level provider can be a huge time saver and will help you sort of build that defense in depth approach. And as mentioned, enterprise providers like CSE will invest heavily in security, but also offer additional technology options like single sign-on, APIs, and things that will, in addition, help you to get better visibility to all the activity on your portfolio and which users have access, etc.
That's a great point. Thanks, Eli. So let's look at the second challenge and really defining the right portfolio for your organization, both when it comes to size and when it comes to helping create a strong brand. When building a domain strategy, you have a few options. You can secure your domain names and use them actively. You can register them defensively, maybe just block domains within the top market for typos, misspellings, and then you can choose to monitor as well. A well-defined policy can help you ensure a consistent naming policy, and that builds brand awareness and customer loyalty, and as a result, builds up a strong security aspect for your portfolio as well. So, for example, if you don't secure your domain names in the top markets that you operate in, or maybe markets that you'll be expanding into, you will be forced to use alternative domain names. This results in a lower brand recognition globally and really can reduce your customer trust. Your clients need to be sure that they're clicking on the right domain name when they go online. So consider those really when creating a policy. When you look at your defensive portfolio, finding a good balance between risk management and budget can be very difficult, and it's very important. We often see domains being deleted in an effort to reduce the size of a portfolio. Our analysis of previously deleted domains, though, found that close to 10% of domains deleted are later on re-registered by third parties. Typically, that's done via low-cost retail registrars, and out of that group of re-registered domains, we found that 8% have SSLs listed and 3% have MX records added. And that clearly suggests that those names may be used for fraudulent activity after they've been deleted, so things like phishing, potentially. And if you look at it in a grand scheme of things, a defensive domain registration or a domain block, where it's available, can really be a cost saving, especially when compared to the cost of available enforcement actions or possible losses and penalties if a domain is used in a phishing attack or hijacked. CSU research showed for top e-commerce and shopping domains that over 70% of typo domains are owned by third parties, and at least 40% of those show characteristics of malintent. So a well-put-together defensive portfolio or a blocking program can really be an effective way of reducing the risk of third-party attacks by making sure that you own and you block the important defensive domains for your portfolio.
Okay, great. So emphasis there on how important it is to have your housekeeping in order with your domain portfolio in the first place. Just kind of looking at time, we're going to need to wrap up now. So just to help us, we've gone over a lot of different things today. So when it comes to domain management and security, can we wrap up with maybe what your top tips would be for the audience today?
Well, like we said towards the start, protect the king. So it's important to document and highlight the importance of these digital assets for the organization. And by creating a domain policy, you'll create visibility, control access rights, build a strong brand, sort of all while keeping the company safe. So working with a single enterprise provider, which not only offers all the security protocols we mentioned, but also has domain and brand protection, fraud protection offerings all under one roof, means that your whole online presence will be the most secure that it can be. So I think if we're looking at the main takeaways from this, we'd say, number one, define that company policy. Number two, use an enterprise class provider. Number three, control user permissions and user access. And finally, number four, make sure to implement those additional layers of security for your key and your vital domain names.
Brilliant. Okay, well, thank you guys. That was a great summary. Thank you both for joining me today and answering my questions. So that is all the time that we do have for today. So yeah, thank you for sharing your thoughts with us. And if anybody in the audience has any questions or has sent any in, we will try and make sure that we come back to you with an answer within about 48 hours or so after the webinar finished. So if you do have any questions for us, feel free to pop them into the Q&A widget. So yeah, that's us done. And so now I'll hand over to Tariq just for any housekeeping items and to close out the session.
Thanks, Stephanie. Moving into what's upcoming. Our next newsletter will be going out on February 25th. Our upcoming webinars, we have our next industry updates webinar on March 4th and our ICANN 71 recap on April 8th. And that's all the time that we have today. Thank you to our presenters, and thank you to everyone that joined us, and we hope to see you next time.